Trigger control and presentation. When it comes to trigger pull, first you must decide which part of your finger to use to actually pull the trigger. There is no one singular best part of your finger to use for all people. It all depends on the size and shape of your hand in relation to the size, shape, trigger pull weight, and trigger travel distance of each gun. This is something that can only be figured out with experimentation and manipulation of your gun. Generally speaking, the closer you get to the tip of your finger, the less leverage you have, and it can therefore make precise control a little bit harder. On the flip side, pulling with the lower part of your finger will give you more mechanical advantage and provide more precise control, but it can often cause people to rotate the pistol in the direction of the squeeze, or cause your firing finger to interfere with your support hand depending on how you grip. You should take the time to experiment and figure out which part of your finger is best for you and your gun. When squeezing the trigger, your goal should be to not allow the actual manipulation of the trigger to affect the aiming of the gun. That is to say, if the gun were empty and you align the sights on your target perfectly, when you squeeze the trigger and the shot breaks, the sights should not have moved from where you were aiming before you started squeezing the trigger. Dry firing your pistol is an excellent way to practice this skill. As you pull the trigger, you will likely notice that there is some trigger travel before the firing pin is actuated and the shot breaks. This is called trigger slack and is slightly different with every gun. Generally speaking, single-action guns such as Glocks, Springfield XDs, and Smith & Wesson M&Ps have a very light period of trigger travel, then come up to a slightly stiffer portion just before the shot breaks. For double-action, single-action pistols like the M9 Beretta, PPK, and many SIG pistols, the first shot will have a very long and much harder trigger pull, and the tension will be more even throughout the pull. This can make it very difficult to memorize where the shot actually breaks. When you dry fire, your goal should be to take the slack out of the trigger until you have just a small bit of trigger travel left until the shot breaks, and break the shot without moving the sights. Just remember, when dry firing with single action guns, you will have to rack the slide between each shot. Once the shot actually breaks, it's a good idea to get into the habit of immediately resetting the trigger to prepare for a follow-up shot. That is to say, as soon as you feel the shot break, your finger should release the trigger until you feel the sear reset, or release the trigger until it can no longer go forward, and then immediately take the slack back out. With time and practice, you should be able to reset the trigger almost as fast as the gun's muzzle rises from recoil and then resettles. This will allow you to break the shot as soon as you obtain an acceptable sight picture, instead of first aligning the sights and then beginning to reset the trigger, which will waste precious time. Now let's discuss ready positions and what they are. Ready positions are simply ways to hold your gun when you have drawn it, but do not have an immediate need to point your gun at a threat. Like so many other things in shooting, there are many different ready positions, as you can see. At Noir, we prefer what is known as the high ready. This is where your arms are bent and your gun is up at an approximate 45-degree angle. You should be able to see over your muzzle, but it is not out of your field of view. Your trigger finger is off the trigger and resting along the frame just under the slide. If your gun has a manual safety or a decocking mechanism, it should be activated at this position. We believe this is the most versatile ready position for several reasons. First, because the gun is pointing up, it offers 360 degrees of mobility by minimizing the risk of muzzle sweeping good guys or innocent bystanders. Second, in the case of an accidental discharge, it would minimize the potential for an off-the-ground ricochet. Third, if you were to trip and fall, you would already be in a good position to catch yourself either with your elbows or with your non-firing hand. Fourth, it is a great position to muzzle strike from should you need to. Fifth, It is much more difficult for someone to grab in close quarter situations than low ready positions. As with anything, situation dictates tactics and methods, and there may be situations where other ready positions would work better, so be sure to familiarize yourself with a variety of ready positions. Presentation. Let's first talk about the points of performance for presentation from high ready, then we will move to various presentation methods from the holster. From high ready, your grip should already be set, with your finger off the trigger and along the frame. When you are ready to shoot, you simply punch the gun out in a straight line, bringing it up to your line of sight. If you have a gun with a manual safety such as a 1911, you should deactivate the safety as you extend forward. You should strive to eliminate any extra motion, as extra motion leads to extra time. We will talk more about this a little bit later in the video, but be absolutely certain to not touch the trigger until the gun is rotated toward the target. Presentation from an overt holster is pretty straightforward. You simply reach down, grabbing your gun as high on the grip as you can, and activate the mechanical release. Pull the gun straight out of the holster, and as soon as the muzzle clears the holster, begin rotating the muzzle toward the threat. As you punch out in a straight line from your holster to your line of sight, bring your support hand together and build a solid grip. If you have a manual safety, remember to deactivate it upon presentation as well. To perform a two-handed draw from concealment, first, with your non-firing hand, grab your shirt and lift it well clear of your weapon. With your firing hand, grip your pistol as high as you can and remove it from your holster. As soon as the muzzle clears the holster, simultaneously rotate the muzzle toward the target and extend along the straightest path possible while building your support hand grip. In the event that your support hand is occupied or disabled, you may need to draw with one hand. To do so, with your firing hand, simply grab your shirt just on the opposite side of your gun's grip. Pull the shirt around the gun and lock it on the other side of the gun grip. Grip the pistol as high as possible and lift it from the holster. As soon as the muzzle clears the holster, simultaneously rotate the muzzle toward the target and extend along the straightest path possible. It is important to note that when drawing from concealment, it is often much more difficult to get a high grip on the gun initially. You may need to practice a very subtle re-gripping of the handle as you present the gun. There is one more optional component to presenting your pistol that situation will dictate whether or not you do. If you have identified a threat and intend to shoot, you can begin taking the slack out of the trigger as soon as you have cleared the holster and have rotated the gun towards the target. The idea here is to have the grip and trigger 95% ready by the time you obtain an acceptable sight picture. Once an acceptable sight picture is obtained, you can simply squeeze the trigger the remaining 5% and break the shot. This will provide the fastest way to get shots on target accurately. Situations that you would not want to take the slack out of the trigger while presenting are those which you have not yet positively identified the subject as a threat. In such cases, you would present your weapon while keeping your finger off the trigger and along the frame below the slide. This will minimize the potential for an accidental shooting. Okay, so now we have gone over presenting and trigger squeeze. Now let's talk about what to do after you're done shooting. The first thing you do is assess the target, whether it is real or just a training target, and make sure no follow-up shots are required. When you have determined that no more shots are needed, take your finger off the trigger, decock or safe the gun if applicable, and come back to the high ready. Many people recommend fostering the habit of looking around in all directions after you come to the high ready and before you stow your gun. The idea is that in a real-world situation, you would want to be absolutely sure that there are no additional threats before you stow your weapon. Once you have scanned around you, you can reholster your weapon. With an overt carry holster, you may want to practice not looking at your holster when reholstering. However, with concealed holsters, you should always look and be very deliberate about reholstering, as there is a higher risk of snagging the trigger. Reholstering to a concealed position should be a very conscious and deliberate task, and you should absolutely avoid touching the trigger while you reholster. Also, always ensure that your manual safety is activated or your gun is decocked if you have those functions. Now let's bring this all together with an ideal demonstration from draw to reholster. Okay, so now let's break that down. I am reaching for the gun and grabbing it high on the grip. As soon as I clear the holster, I begin rotating the gun toward the threat and bringing it up to my support hand. I simultaneously build my grip, extend my arms, and take the slack out of the trigger. I obtain an acceptable sight picture and break the shots, rapidly resetting the trigger after each shot. Notice the pause as I am assessing the targets to ensure no follow-up shots are needed. I then decock the gun and bring it to high ready and complete my 360 scan while being mindful of the direction of my muzzle. I have assessed that there are no more threats, and I look at my holster as I reholster my pistol. Things to avoid. This is what we call the tomahawk. As you can see, there is a lot of extra movement which amounts to taking longer in the stroke. Next we have what we call bowling. Just like the tomahawk, this is just added motion that adds time to your draw. Here's an example of waiting way too long to reset your trigger. This is what we call slapping the trigger, and it is the opposite of a slow, controlled trigger squeeze. As you can probably guess, it can really pull you off target and prevent precise shots. A very good grip can minimize the effects of trigger slapping, but you should be very conscious of doing this, as this is one of the most common causes of poor shot groups. Looking over your sights after each shot. This is a very bad habit. A lot of unnecessary movement, and it's very slow. People often do this to look at where their shots are hitting between shots. You should really strive to be able to tell where your shots broke without seeing the impact. This ability will come over time and is very much built on regular dry fire practice. The ultra quick, useless scan. If you are not thinking about why you are scanning, why bother scan at all? Scanning is by no means a requirement. If you just rush through the motions, it has no value, so you are better off not doing it at all than rushing through and looking silly. The muzzle sweeping scan. Obviously, this is very unsafe and defeats the purpose of high ready. So that's it for this segment. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the range.